welcome back. And today we're working on this little data terminal right up here. This is sitting on top of a Zilog System 8000 that was so kindly donated to the channel by Uncle Stewie. But this system unfortunately is incomplete. We're missing the ECC board and the memory boards for it. So if anybody out there has a line on those boards for a System 8000, let me know, because I would absolutely love to get this machine up and going. But with those boards missing and the system incomplete, it's sitting on the back burner for now. Which means that today we're going to focus just on this terminal up top, and this is an ADM-3A built by Lear-Siegler. That's right, the Lear that built the Learjet. The same company that was building private jets also built data terminals, which I find hilarious. This was from the early 70s, and while it was a very influential and popular terminal, it wasn't necessarily the first. It was just kind of like the terminal that really popularized the shift from teletypes to actual glass terminals like this. This particular one I got from some computer guy. That's his username, and until he becomes the computer guy, he'll always just be some computer guy. We set up a trade. I hooked up with an ADDS Viewpoint, and I got this beautiful ADM-3A back, but it does need some help. This one is suffering very heavily from a problem called cataracts. This is where there is a protective shield glued to the front of the CRT, and that glue starts to go bad and create these little bubbles between the shield. So that is what I want to fix today. I want to get this protective shield off, clean the glue off, and then reattach the protective shield and reinstall the CRT back into the system. Now there's a couple other problems with this system that need to be addressed as much as we can today. There is a crack in the case down here. It is missing an IC on the inside, and it needs a very deep clean. There's also a couple problems that we won't be able to tackle today that are on the long range goals here. It is missing the Q key over here, but the stem is still there, and I can see the contacts on the inside. So the Q key should work. It's just missing the cap on top. We're also missing a cover over here. Now, there is no stem here, so I think this is just a blank cover. So we're keeping our eye out for that. And we're missing the little ADM-3A cover that goes over the dip switches here on the left. So there's a couple things that we won't be able to tackle today, but there is a lot that we will. So the first step is going to be getting the CRT free from the case here, so that way we can get it out into the sun and let it start warming up. The ADM-3A has this awesome little clamshell design that flips open to reveal the absolutely stunning PCB inside. Just pure TTL goodness in here. This empty socket is the IC that we're missing, so we'll have to figure something out for it. To get the PCB out, we'll disconnect the speaker, then the CRT analog board connector, followed by the CRT power connector that's coming from the transformer, and finally the main power connector on the other side of the PCB. Then the whole thing lifts straight out the top. There were no screws holding this one in, and I'm not sure if that's normal or not, since the top half of the clamshell holds it in place pretty well. But look at that, there's our missing IC. What was it doing down here? Anyways, next let's get the CRT and analog board out. The CRT is held in place with 2 screws, and all the wires, including the HV wire, have already been disconnected. And with everything disconnected, it pulls out easy peasy. This sticker here says this tube employs integral implosion protection. That's the glue that's holding on the shield that's causing all of our cataracts. Today is the perfect day for this. It's just clear blue skies out today, and the temperature is creeping up past 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 43 degrees Celsius. It's plenty hot, so we'll just set the CRT in direct sunlight and let it bake for a few hours. And while that's cooking, I want to clean up the rest of the terminal. To get the clamshell apart, there are 2 pins in the back. Just remove the retaining O-rings and then hammer them out with a punch. And with those out, the top half of the clamshell comes right off. The analog board is in the top half of the clamshell, and it can be removed by just taking out one screw and then lifting it right out. So far, I'm really happy with the ease of serviceability on this thing. The top half will get a good soaking with Simple Green, and then a nice spray down with the hose, rinsing away nearly 50 years of grime. We'll make sure to get the inside too. I want this thing spick and span. After it's fully dried off, I'll use some Gorilla Glue, the strong construction kind, and try to glue back together the split in the front of the case. I put a little in between the split as well as on the backside for added support. So while that sets, it's time to get to work on the bottom half of the clamshell. And first we'll remove these black metal plates that are just absolutely filthy. Then we'll take the whole thing out and give it a spray over with the air compressor, trying to get all of the big pieces out. To remove the transformer out of this thing would have been an absolute nightmare, so we'll just clean this one with some Simple Green and rags, and it's shining up really nice. It just needs a bit more elbow grease is all. We'll flip it over and hit the bottom as well, and aside from some scratches and dings, it's cleaning up really well. Next, I want to focus on those black metal pieces. They were really gross, so I let them soak heavily in Simple Green, and thankfully the grime started to lift up and they started to clean up really nicely. And just look at how amazingly this thing shined up. It looks brand new in here. Next up, let's clean the keyboard. I'll remove every single key, tossing them into this bucket of warm water and dish soap. Then comes the tedious process of removing each key, wiping it down, and letting it dry. It's a relatively small keyboard without any function keys or number pad, but still, this is always a time-consuming process. So I just let the tunes roll and got into a nice therapeutic groove. Then we just popped all of the keys back into their respective locations. And finally, to clean the PCB, I just use a nice soft paintbrush that tends to work really well on PCBs without damaging anything. Then we'll drop the newly cleaned PCB and keyboard back into the lower half of the clamshell. All right, now that it's all nice and clean, let's take a little look at what is the ADM-3A. And well, this is a pretty influential terminal in the history of data terminals. Data terminals originally started out as just being teletypes, not unlike the Model 14 and Model 15 that I have outside. That was the primary means of communication with a computer. And the most popular teletype I think that was used for computers was the ASR33 that was introduced in 1963. Interestingly, just shortly after that, the IBM 2260 was released in 1964, and it was an actual video display terminal. And I think this might be the very first, but IBM being IBM means that this terminal was extremely rare and very expensive. So the ASR33 reigned supreme for many years to come. However, the Hazeltine 2000 was released in 1970, and the Tektronix 4010 was released in 1972. Both of these were also CRT-based data terminals, but again, I think high prices kept them from being too popular. Then we got the trifecta over the span of about 4 years. In 1974, the VT52 was released. In 1976, the ADM-3A was released. And in 1978, the VT100 was released. All three of these were cheap enough to essentially supplant the ASR33 and usher in the wave of data terminals being used on computers. So this is a very influential machine, even if it's not actually the first one. And this full single PCB here is just fascinating, because if we look at a lot of newer data terminals like the VT320 or even the ADDS Regent 100, they often have a CPU inside, a little 8085 or something like that. But you can see there is no CPU inside of here. The biggest IC is that one that we were missing, and it's the TR1602, and this is actually a UART, so it's just a standard serial interface IC here. There's three more big ICs. This 74154 is a 4 to 16 demultiplexer. And then these two over here, I believe, are ROMs. And then it does have to have some type of random access memory to store the data on the screen. And we can see all of that right here. These are MM2102, 1024-bit by 1 static RAMs. And near as I can tell, there's 14 of these, but I'm not really sure how they're laying it out because 14 is kind of a strange number. So I don't really know the full architecture of this board. But as you can see, everything else on here is 7400 series logic. All of this combined gives us pretty impressive data terminal specifications. You can change up the communication through a very wide range of baud rates and different type of communication protocols. You can see it goes all the way down to 75 baud and all the way up to 19.2. Has RS-232 and a 20 milliamp current loop. The screen is a full 80 columns by 24 rows. The character set is 5 by 7 dot matrix characters, and the memory can store 1,920 characters total. Now they might be using some of this SRAM for other things as well, but that's going to be primarily what it's used for. Let's see if we can get the protective shield off the front of the CRT now. I'll start by cutting the tape that runs around the outside. Then I'll use a little piece of braided wire to cut into the glue from the corners. I'm just trying to get through the worst of the glue on the edges here. I'm also being really careful not to go too deep and potentially scratch the glass. Once I have a decent amount cut away, I'll switch over to using my Bondo spreader to dig a little deeper. You can see the heat has really loosened the glue up, and the spreader is grabbing huge chunks of glue and just sliding them out the edge. And I just continue to work my way around the edges, pulling out bigger and bigger chunks of glue until finally, with all of the edges cleaned up, the protective shield just pops right off. Then it's really easy to peel off the rest of the glue still stuck to the center of the shield. Back inside now, out of the 110-degree heat, I want to clean up the CRT as best as I can, as well as the front shield. I do want to reattach this shield, so both surfaces need to be as clean as possible. To reattach it, I'm going to use double-sided foam tape. It should be thick enough for the shield to sit properly on the front. And I just ran some strips along the outside edges, then peeled the backing paper off, and finally dropped the shield back into place. With the cataracts now successfully removed, let's get that CRT back into the clamshell, tightening it down with the 2 screws. Then we'll plug everything in and away we go. All right, here goes nothing. First power up in who knows how many years. Hopefully nothing goes up in smoke, but if it does, hopefully the camera catches it. You know, or nothing could happen. So why didn't it do anything? Well, off camera I pulled the multimeter out and I checked the 5-volt rail and it was sitting at about 300 millivolts. And that sounds suspiciously like a bad capacitor, particularly this big silver jobby back here. That's definitely on the 5-volt rail, and if it were shorted, that would definitely keep our logic from ever coming up. But I actually did my due diligence this time. I pulled the schematic out and I checked for shorts. Particularly the big filter cap is before the 7805s. And then after the 7805, we have a bunch of smaller filter caps as well. So I actually measured the resistance on the 5-volt rail at the ICs. It comes out to about 500 ohms, which is what I would expect given the massive number of ICs on this. And I measured the resistance of the 5-volt rail before the 7805s, which is checking pretty much directly across this big filter cap back here. And it would start pretty low at about 50 to 100 ohms, and then it would build up to well over a kilo ohm as the multimeter charged the capacitor up. That's good news. That tells me that the capacitor isn't shorted, so it should be doing something, right? So the next step was I pulled off the little plug back here and I checked the AC coming in, and that was a solid 9 volts AC, so that was all correct. And then I plugged it back in and flipped the switch again to check the voltage levels, and it beeped. So I think maybe I just had a bad connection on this plug over here. So I'm going to bring the camera in a little closer. I'm going to set the other camera up so you can see the monitor, and we're going to flip it on again, and hopefully it beeps a second time. All right, let's try it again, see if it beeps a second time. It did beep a second time. I've got the other camera over here showing the CRT, and it should be warming up. Oh, yeah. Check it out. I mean, that's not exactly what we wanted to see. We wanted to see a blinking cursor, but that's telling us that we've got something showing up. Oh, there's a blinking cursor. Oh, we had a blinking cursor once, and then it went away. If I change the little potentiometer at the front here, our cursor kind of comes and goes. I don't understand that. But we have life out of it. Now we just got to figure out how to make that life actually look correct. Oh, this is exciting. That's really cool. All right, the best way to test it that I could think of was to hook it up to a known working system. So I've got it plugged into the Centurion, the mini Centurion right now. I have the dip switches set up to 9600 7E1. If it actually is sending and receiving, we should see D equals, and then I should be able to type like H1, and it'll give us an error, hopefully. So let's flip the power on here. It's going to take it a second for the CRT to warm up. There we go. We have a little block at the top. If I hit the reset button on the Centurion, we should see D equals. Yes. D equals, we got it. This is hopefully a functioning terminal. Let's hit H0 here and error. And it all looks like garbage. If I hit the reset, oh, that's interesting. If I hit the reset button, it doesn't clear the screen. It just continues with D equals. And then if I type H0 again, it goes back to error. The Centurion is sending a clear screen signal to this, but it's probably not the right protocol for the ADM-3A. It's set up for an ADDS Regent 100 terminal. So that's not unexpected, but look at that. It is actually working. We do need to seriously try to figure out how to clean up this image because it looks awful. The first culprit is this potentiometer. It's bent up and just feels broken, and even some contact cleaner didn't make it do any better. And the effect it has on the picture is pretty profound. This flickering is just from turning the potentiometer. And that actually makes sense. This is the contrast potentiometer that sits directly on the video input. The signal coming in to draw the dots on the screen is coming purely from this single line. So if it's bad, it could definitely cause the issue we're seeing. I was too lazy to fire up the desoldering iron, so I just used solder wick and a little bit of prying this time, and sure enough, the old potentiometer came right out. Then we'll just solder a new potentiometer right in place. All right, new potentiometer is in place. I put a little cap on it, but it doesn't stick up far enough. Still, it keeps the hole from just being this gaping hole. Let's give it a test and see what happens. Now that we know the communication works, I've actually just jumpered across pins 2 and 3 in the back, so it should just echo whatever I type here. We still beeped, that's good. The CRT is going to start warming up, and it looks fantastic without having all of that cataracts on it. We should see a little block show up here in the top left corner, unless I broke something. Oh, there it goes, and I got a second beep. That was interesting. The block already looks a lot better. Let's try typing and see what happens. Oh, wow, look at that. That is, oh, that's awesome. Quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And a line feed. Yes. That looks absolutely beautiful. It is so sharp. Who would have thought that just the little potentiometer here could make all the difference? And yeah, I can bring up the brightness or the contrast so much that it really starts to blur together and look nasty. And then we can go all the way down to where it disappears. But right about there looks really great. Let's plug this back into the Centurion and see what an actual computer looks like on this terminal. All right, we're plugged back into the mini Centurion. We're at a D equals prompt, and the heads have loaded on the hawk drive, so we'll just hit H1 here. Did 3 RTZs, should start loading the OPSIS. Yeah, it doesn't clear the screen. That's really interesting. The D equals H1 should have gone away. All right, let's hit enter on that, and we'll do 082384. We don't care about the current time. It's loading up. We should see CRT0 ready. If we do a .sta, we should get a status display. That's really interesting. It doesn't clear the screen. It always throws me for a loop. But there we go. We can see .dir1 for Usagi. That is just awesome. Oh man. And we have the general ledger on here. So do 100, 1. There we go. I'm absolutely certain that you guys can't hear that, but whenever the disc is doing massive seeks, I can hear it in the speaker of the terminal. The magnetic field from the drive seeking is interfering with the speaker. That is awesome. There we go, ADM-3A fully restored and looking beautiful. I am in love with the shape of this terminal. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. And fixing the cataracts on it, man, what a difference that made. It looks brand new. And I actually thought that was going to be a lot harder than it was. So if you have a data terminal or an old monitor that has the case of cataracts, throw it in a car, drive on down to Texas. We'll toss it in the sun, crack open a cold drinks, and let the hot Texan sun out there do its work. Who said 110-degree summers weren't good for anything? And, well, I mean, look for yourself. The result is absolutely worth it. I cannot wait to get this plugged into the Zilog System 8000. But like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we're missing some very important boards for that machine. We're missing the ECC board as well as any of the memory boards. So if you've got a line on some Zilog System 8000 boards, let me know, because I think those two are going to make an excellent pairing. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.